Imagine walking into a luxury car dealership, your heart set on purchasing the car of your dreams, only to be judged not by your wealth or character, but by the clothes you wear. What would you do if the salespeople sneered at you, looked down on you, and tossed you out like you were worthless? This is exactly what happened to an elderly millionaire, but what he did next left the entire showroom in stunned silence. Hello guys, welcome to Stories of Hope. Today I'm really excited to share an incredible and emotional real-life inspired story with you. It's about an elderly man who was humiliated and kicked out of a luxury dealership, only to return moments later and teach everyone a lesson they would never forget. Before we start, let me know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Tell me the name of your city, your country. Now, let's get into the story. A chilly wind swept through the bustling city streets as an elderly man, dressed in a worn-out brown coat and faded jeans, walked toward the grand glass doors of an elite luxury car dealership. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his posture was upright, but his clothes told a different story, one of simplicity, of a man who looked out of place among the polished floors and gleaming cars. Inside, salespeople in crisp suits were busy entertaining their wealthy clients. Expensive watches glimmered on wrists, designer bags rested on marble countertops, and the scent of rich leather and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. This dealership wasn't just a place to buy cars. It was a symbol of status, an exclusive world where only the elite were welcomed. The moment the elderly man stepped inside, conversations paused. Eyes flickered toward him, scanning his appearance from head to toe. A salesman, tall and well-groomed, smirked before exchanging glances with his colleagues. "Sir, can I help you?" the salesman asked, his tone dripping with politeness, yet carrying an undertone of skepticism. The elderly man nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, I'd like to see some of your top models. I'm interested in buying a car today." A brief silence filled the room before muffled chuckles broke out among the sales staff. The idea of this poorly dressed man being a serious buyer seemed absurd to them. "Sir, our cars start at $250,000, the salesman said, forcing a tight smile. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at something a bit more affordable?" The elderly man's expression remained unchanged. "I understand the price. I'd like to see your best models." Another salesman, unable to hold back his amusement, whispered to his colleague, "This guy's probably just here to take pictures and waste our time." Their laughter was quiet but sharp, cutting through the elderly man's dignity like a blade. The first salesman sighed and crossed his arms. "Look, sir, we're really busy with serious customers. If you're not here to make a real purchase, I'm afraid we can't entertain tours." The elderly man's eyes darkened for a moment, but his voice remained steady. "I see. So, you're refusing to show me the cars because of how I look?" One of the salesmen, growing impatient, scoffed. "Sir, let's be honest. This isn't a place for window shopping. We deal with real buyers here." Before the elderly man could respond, a manager, who had been observing the entire exchange, finally stepped in. He walked over, his eyes cold and his expression firm. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said in a clipped tone, "but if you're not here for a legitimate purchase, I must ask you to leave." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The elderly man stood still, as if measuring the weight of the humiliation he had just endured. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the dealership, his steps slow but steady. As the glass doors shut behind him, the salespeople erupted into quiet laughter. "What a joke!" one of them muttered. "Did he really think he could fool us?" Little did they know, they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, because the elderly man wasn't just anybody, and when he returned, he would change everything, Outside the dealership, the elderly man took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the bustling street. The cold rejection still echoed in his ears, but there was no anger on his face, only a quiet resolve. He had spent his entire life building something from nothing, facing hardships most of these young salesmen could never imagine. And now, at this moment, they had dismissed him based on nothing more than the clothes he wore. But what they didn't know was that beneath that old coat and those faded jeans was a man who had built an empire. As he walked away from the dealership, he pulled out his phone and made a call. The voice on the other end answered almost instantly. "Sir, is everything all right?" The elderly man's voice was calm. "Meet me in front of the dealership in 20 minutes. "Yes, sir, right away." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued walking down the sidewalk. People brushed past him, rushing to work, talking on phones, lost in their own worlds. No one spared him a second glance. That was the funny thing about society. People judged what they saw on the surface. They assumed wealth had a look, that power had a uniform. They never imagined that the true giants of this world often walked among them in silence. 20 minutes later, a sleek black limousine pulled up in front of the dealership. The driver stepped out, quickly making his way around to open the door. Heads turned as the long vehicle came to a stop. Customers and salesmen inside the dealership caught sight of the expensive car. Their interest immediately piqued, but their curiosity turned into sheer disbelief when they saw who stepped out. It was the same elderly man they had kicked out not long ago, but this time he wasn't alone. Two men in perfectly tailored suits followed him, their expressions serious, their presence demanding attention. One of them was his financial advisor, the other was his attorney. The elderly man walked with an air of quiet confidence, no longer just an unassuming figure in an old coat, but a man who commanded respect. As he entered the dealership again, the same salesman who had laughed at him earlier now exchanged nervous glances. Their easy arrogance was gone, replaced by uncertainty. The manager, who had personally asked him to leave, stiffened as he approached. "Sir, welcome back," the manager said, forcing a polite smile. "How can we assist you today?" The elderly man didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, watching as unease settled into the faces of those who had ridiculed him. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a black checkbook. "I'm here to buy a car," he said simply. The manager cleared his throat, suddenly overly enthusiastic. "Of course, sir. We would be honored to—" The elderly man held up a hand, cutting him off. His eyes, once kind and patient, were now sharp. "Before we continue, I'd like to make something very clear." The entire showroom was quiet now. Even the customers who were previously browsing had stopped to watch the scene unfold. When I walked into this dealership earlier, I was treated with disrespect, not because I was rude, not because I did anything wrong, but because of the way I looked. Some of the salesmen shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their gazes, realizing where this was going. I've spent my life working hard. I started with nothing, built everything I have from the ground up. But today you judged me based on my clothes, not my worth. He turned to the manager, who was now visibly sweating. I was told to leave, dismissed as if I were beneath your time. Well, I wanted to show you something. With that, he tore out a check from his book and held it up. The amount written on it was staggering. Several zeros lined the page, an amount large enough to buy the most expensive vehicle on the showroom floor. Gasps filled the room. The salesman who had laughed at him earlier now looked as though they wanted to disappear. But here's the lesson, the elderly man continued. I have the money. I could buy any car I want right now in cash, but I won't. The manager paled. Sir, please. The elderly man shook his head. Number, because respect is worth more than money, and a business that only values customers based on appearances doesn't deserve mine. With that, he ripped the check in half, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. The message was clear. He wasn't just walking away from a car, he was walking away from them. The room was silent. No one dared to speak, and as he turned and walked out of the dealership for the last time, he couldn't help but smile. Because in the end, respect couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. The tension in the dealership lingered long after the elderly millionaire walked out. The salesmen stood frozen in their spots, the manager looking as if he had just lost a fortune, which, in reality, he had. The shredded check lay on the floor, a painful reminder of the mistake they had made. Outside, the millionaire stepped into his limousine, the driver closing the door behind him. As the car pulled away, he leaned back in his seat, gazing out at the city streets. He had built his wealth through hard work, determination, and, most importantly, treating people with respect. And yet, even now, the world hadn't changed. People still judged based on appearances, forgetting that true worth couldn't be measured by clothes or outward displays of wealth. His financial advisor, seated beside him, finally broke the silence. "Sir, I have to say, that was quite the statement you made back there." The millionaire smirked slightly, his eyes still on the passing buildings. "It wasn't just a statement," he replied. "It was a lesson, whether they learn from it or not. Well, that's up to them." The limousine turned a corner, heading toward a part of the city far removed from the gleaming luxury of the dealership. Here the streets were rougher, the buildings older. Life wasn't glamorous here, but this was where his real story had begun. As the car came to a stop, he stepped out and looked around. The place had changed over the years. Some old shops had closed, replaced by new ones, but the memories remained. He walked slowly, taking it all in. This was where he had lived as a young man, struggling to make ends meet. He had worked long hours, saved every penny, and fought for every opportunity. There was a time when even affording a meal had been a challenge, and then, as if pulled by fate, his eyes landed on a small, run-down auto repair shop at the corner of the street. The sign was faded, the walls cracked with age, but he recognized it immediately. It was the very first business he had ever owned. The memories flooded back. He had started with nothing but a dream and a relentless drive to succeed. He had worked late nights, often sleeping in the shop because he couldn't afford rent elsewhere. Slowly, he had built something out of nothing, and from that one tiny repair shop, his empire had grown. A deep sense of nostalgia settled over him. He had come so far, and yet, standing here, he felt like that young man again, the one with fire in his heart and the belief that anything was possible. As he took a step closer, he noticed something. The shop wasn't abandoned. Inside, a young man, probably in his 20s, was hard at work, his hands covered in grease as he tinkered under the hood of an old car. Curious, the millionaire pushed the door open. A bell jingled softly, announcing his arrival. The young man looked up, startled. "Oh, sorry, sir. We're not taking customers right now. I'm the only one working and I..." He paused, eyeing the millionaire's worn-out coat and simple jeans. His expression softened. "Actually, if you need help, I can take a quick look at your car. I don't charge much," he added quickly, as if worried about overpricing a struggling customer. The millionaire smiled. There was kindness in this young man, something rare. "I don't need a repair," he said, stepping further inside. "I used to own this place, a long time ago." The young man's eyes widened. You? You owned this shop?" The millionaire nodded. "Started my whole life here. built everything from the ground up." The young mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly looking embarrassed. "Wow, I had no idea. I actually just bought this place a few months ago. I didn't even know its history." "Why'd you buy it?" the millionaire asked. The young man hesitated before answering. "I wanted to make something of my own. Didn't have a lot of money, but I figured if I worked hard enough, I could turn this into something big." He let out a small, sheepish chuckle. Not much progress yet, though. The millionaire studied him for a moment, recognizing something in him, his younger self, the same hunger, the same drive, the same relentless spirit. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a business card. "Come see me tomorrow," he said, handing it over. "I want to help you." The young man took the card, glancing at the name printed on it. His eyes widened in shock. You're him?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You're the—" The millionaire just smiled. "See you tomorrow." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind a young man who had just been given an opportunity that would change his life forever. That night, as the young mechanic sat in his small apartment, he couldn't stop staring at the business card in his hand. His mind was racing. The name printed on it belonged to one of the wealthiest men in the country, a man whose success story had inspired countless entrepreneurs. And yet, just hours ago, he had stood in the same worn-out shop, dressed in simple clothes, speaking as if he were just another ordinary man. Was this real? Could this really be happening? Sleep was impossible. The young man found himself researching everything he could about the millionaire, the companies he had built, the industries he had conquered. He read article after article, interview after interview, trying to understand why someone like him would take an interest in a struggling mechanic with nothing but a dream. Morning arrived too soon, but the young man wasted no time. He put on his best shirt, still far from fancy, but at least clean, and took the bus across town to the address listed on the business card. When he arrived, he found himself standing in front of a towering skyscraper, its glass windows reflecting the city skyline. This was the headquarters of an empire. Nervously, he stepped inside. The lobby was grand, marble floors, high ceilings, walls lined with framed photographs of the millionaire shaking hands with world leaders and celebrities. It was overwhelming. A receptionist greeted him politely. "Do you have an appointment?" He cleared his throat. Yes. He told me to come." He handed over the business card. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Without another word, she picked up the phone. "Sir, he's here." Moments later, a man in a sleek suit appeared. "Right this way." The young mechanic followed him through a hallway that led to an elevator, which took them all the way to the top floor. His heart pounded in his chest as the doors opened to reveal a massive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and there, sitting behind a grand wooden desk, was the millionaire himself. But he wasn't dressed in an expensive suit like the others in the building. He was still in his simple coat, just like the day before. "Glad you came," the millionaire said with a warm smile, gesturing for him to sit. The young man hesitated before lowering himself into the chair. He felt out of place in this world of wealth and power. "Do you know why I asked you here?" the millionaire asked, leaning forward. The mechanic shook his head. "Honestly, no. I mean, I still can't believe you even talked to me." The millionaire chuckled. "Let me tell you something. When I was your age, I didn't have connections. I didn't have money. I had nothing but that little shop and a dream. And you remind me of myself." The young man swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," the millionaire continued. "Just listen. People like you and me, we don't get handed opportunities. We have to fight for them. And when we do get a chance, we have to prove we deserve it." The young mechanic nodded, hanging on to every word. I'm going to invest in your shop, the millionaire said suddenly. But not for free. I want you to work for it. Show me you have the fire to turn it into something big. The young man's breath caught in his throat. You do that? Yes, but let me be clear. I'm not giving you a handout. I'll provide the resources, the tools, and the guidance. But the work, that's all you. The young man straightened in his chair, determination burning in his eyes. I won't let you down. The millionaire smiled. Good, because from today forward, you're not just fixing cars, you're building a legacy. And with that, the real journey began. The weight of the moment hung heavy on the young mechanic's shoulders as he left the towering skyscraper. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the papers the millionaire had handed him, official documents outlining the investment, the expectations, and the roadmap for what was to come. It all felt surreal. For so long, life had been a struggle, a battle against endless obstacles, against the doubt of others, against the harsh reality that no one was coming to rescue him. And yet, here he was, walking down the busy city streets, holding in his hands what could be the key to everything he had ever dreamed of. But dreams required action. He spent the rest of the day at his small, worn-down garage, staring at the cracked concrete floor, the rusting tools, the ancient register that barely worked. Could he really turn this place into something greater? Would people ever trust him enough to bring their expensive cars here? Doubt crept in like a slow-moving shadow. That night, he barely slept. His mind was a battlefield, one side filled with excitement, the other with fear. What if he failed? What if he let down the one person who had believed in him? But then he remembered the millionaire's words. People like you and me, we don't get handed opportunities. We have to fight for them. And he had been fighting all his life. The next morning, determined, he got up before the sun and started working. The first step was fixing what was broken, starting with the shop itself. He used the first part of the investment wisely. The cracked floors were repaired, the walls, once dull and peeling, were given a fresh coat of paint. He upgraded his tools, replacing the rusted, outdated equipment with state-of-the-art machinery. A new sign was installed outside, bold and professional, announcing to the world that this wasn't just a run-down repair shop anymore. This was a business ready to grow. The millionaire didn't just hand him money and walk away. He visited often, offering advice, pushing him to think bigger. You don't just want to fix cars, the millionaire told him one afternoon. You want to build trust. People don't come to a mechanic because they love spending money. They come because they need someone they can rely on. Be that person. The young man took those words to heart. He treated every customer like family. He explained repairs in a way they understood. He never overcharged, never cut corners. Word spread fast. A man who had once been struggling to pay his own rent was now seeing more customers than he could handle. But success didn't come without challenges. One evening, after closing up for the day, he received a message that made his heart sink. Someone was trying to destroy everything he had built. The young mechanic's hands tightened around his phone as he read the message again. Watch your back. This shop won't last long. His stomach churned. He had worked tirelessly to build his business, sacrificing sleep, pushing through exhaustion, and proving to himself and the world that he could rise above his circumstances. But now, someone wanted to take it all away. Who would do this? His first instinct was to ignore it. Maybe it was a prank, just someone trying to scare him. But deep down, he knew better. Success often bred resentment, and not everyone wanted to see him rise. The next morning, as he arrived at the shop, his worst fears were confirmed. The newly painted sign had been vandalized. Ugly red spray paint covered his name. Trash had been dumped in front of the entrance, and there were scratches on the glass window. A deep anger bubbled inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had come too far to let fear dictate his next move. Instead of reacting with rage, he cleaned up the mess and got back to work. Customers started arriving as usual, but a few seemed hesitant. Some whispered among themselves, glancing at the vandalized sign. That's when an older man, one of his first loyal customers, walked up to him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't let them shake you, son," the man said. "I've seen people like you before, the ones who refuse to give up. Keep doing what you do best, and the right people will stand by you." The young mechanic nodded, but the tension in his chest remained. He needed to find out who was behind this. Later that evening, after closing up, he stayed hidden inside the shop, watching from the shadows. Hours passed, and just when he was about to give up, he saw movement near the entrance. A figure, dressed in dark clothing, crept toward the window. Heart pounding, he stepped out. "Hey, what are you doing?" The figure froze for a moment, then turned to run. Without thinking, the mechanic chased after them. His legs burned as he sprinted down the dark alley, closing the distance. The figure stumbled, and in that moment of hesitation, he grabbed their arm. To his shock, the person yanked off their hood, revealing a familiar face, one of the mechanics from the luxury dealership he had been kicked out of weeks ago. The young man's jaw clenched. "It's you!" The mechanic sneered. "You don't belong here. You think you can just build a name for yourself and take business from real professionals? You're nothing. You got lucky because some rich guy took pity on you." Anger flared in the young man's chest, but he refused to let it consume him. He had learned too much to let hate define his actions. Instead, he let out a slow breath and said, "I built this shop with my own hands. I work hard every day, and I've earned every customer who walks through my door. If you think tearing me down will make you more successful, you're the one who's got it wrong." The other mechanic scoffed, but had no response. "Go ahead," the young man continued. "Keep wasting your time trying to ruin me, or go work on your own life and be better at what you do." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without another word, the other mechanic yanked his arm away and disappeared into the night. The young man knew this wasn't the end of his challenges. There would always be obstacles, people who doubted him, and those who wanted to see him fail. But he had come too far, and he wasn't about to stop now. The incident with the rival mechanic left a bitter taste in his mouth, but the young man refused to let it break him. He had built his business from nothing, and no amount of jealousy or sabotage would take that away from him. Still, as he stood in his shop the next morning, looking at the vandalized sign and the mess left behind, doubt crept into his mind. Would customers start avoiding his shop? Would they believe the rumors being spread about him? But then something unexpected happened. One by one, familiar faces from the neighborhood started showing up. Not just customers, but people who had seen him grow, who had watched his journey from the start. The old man who had encouraged him before was the first to arrive. Then came the woman whose car he had fixed for free when she was struggling, followed by the young father he had given a discount to when money was tight. And they weren't just there to watch, they were there to help. A group of them grabbed cleaning supplies and started scrubbing the graffiti off his sign. Others swept away the trash, while a few men offered to repaint the walls. The young mechanic stood frozen, his heart swelling. "Why are you all doing this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. The old man smiled. "Because good people deserve good things, and because you earned this." Tears burned at the back of his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away. He wasn't used to people standing up for him. His whole life had been a battle fought alone. But in this moment, he realized something. He had built more than just a business. He had built trust. That day, the shop was cleaned up and restored, and despite the challenges, business kept growing. But just as he thought things were finally settling down, he received an unexpected visitor, the millionaire. The man stepped out of his sleek black car and looked around, nodding approvingly. "I heard you had some trouble," he said. The young mechanic scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, but I handled it." "I can see that." The millionaire smiled. "And I also see that you've built something even greater than a business. You've built a community." The young man wasn't sure how to respond. He had never thought of it that way, but looking around, he realized it was true. The millionaire studied him for a moment before reaching into his pocket and pulling out another envelope. The mechanic's stomach dropped. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I don't need more money." The older man chuckled. "This isn't a handout, son. This is an offer." The young mechanic hesitated before taking the envelope. When he opened it, his hands shook. Inside were papers, documents for a second shop, an expansion, a chance to grow even bigger. He looked up, confused. "Why?" The millionaire's expression turned serious. "Because when I was your age, someone gave me a chance, and I'm standing here today because I took it. Now it's your turn." The young mechanic's heart pounded in his chest. He had never imagined something like this. The idea of expanding, of reaching even more people. It was terrifying, but it was also thrilling. He looked around at the people who had supported him, at the shop he had poured his soul into. Then he looked back at the millionaire and nodded. "I'm ready." The older man smiled. "Good. Then let's get to work." The young mechanic could barely believe what was happening. He had spent his entire life struggling, pushing through every obstacle alone, and now, standing before him, was the very man who had once watched him get humiliated at a luxury dealership, offering him a future he never thought possible. The millionaire handed him the documents. "I want you to look these over. Take your time. But if you agree, we'll turn your business into something much bigger." The young man felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was more than just an opportunity, it was a test. Could he handle the pressure? Was he ready for the responsibility? Instead of answering immediately, he did what he had always done. He got back to work. For days he worked tirelessly, fixing cars, handling customers, and making sure that his shop ran just as it always had. But every night he stared at the papers, reading them over and over again, wondering if he was making the right choice. Then, one evening, after closing up, he stood outside his shop and watched the sun dip below the horizon. He thought about the nights he had gone to bed hungry, the times he had almost given up, the people who had doubted him, and then he thought about the customers who believed in him, the people who had shown up to help him when his shop was vandalized, the community he had built. That's when he knew. The next morning, he walked into the millionaire's office, documents in hand. The older man looked up from his desk and raised an eyebrow. "Well?" The young mechanic placed the signed papers in front of him. "I'm in." A slow smile spread across the millionaire's face. "I had a feeling you'd say that." From that moment on, everything changed. With the millionaire's guidance, the young mechanic opened a second shop, then a third. His business grew, not because of luck, but because of the values he had built it on. Hard work, honesty, and the belief that no matter where you come from, you can rise above your circumstances. And one day, years later, a young boy walked into his shop, covered in grease, looking for a chance. He reminded the mechanic of himself all those years ago, hungry for an opportunity, desperate to prove himself. The mechanic smiled and handed the boy a wrench. "Let's get to work." Because success wasn't just about making it, it was about lifting others up along the way. And that, my friends, is what true wealth looks like. If this story touched your heart, if it inspired you, then don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories of Hope. We have many more stories that will move you, inspire you, and remind you that kindness, hard work, and resilience can change lives. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.